Senator, you and I have talked about this topic many times over the years, always cryptically and quietly. Cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, George, I have been interested in the subject for a long time. Going back to a time you came to Washington, a long, long time ago. I'll bet it was 20 years ago. You came to Washington, and I think you did an interview with John Glenn. But that was on a different subject directly. It was involving space chimps, and we're trying to save them because they were going to kill them all, who had gone into space for scientific reasons. It was on or about that time that I talked to John Glenn about, he said, John, what do you think of all this stuff about these unidentified flying objects? He says, I don't know what they are. We should study it. Long, long time ago, but I've never forgotten that. So when I had the opportunity to do something about this, was a number of years later, but John Glenn was always in my head. And as I've told a number of people the last few days, one of the easiest meetings I ever had was a meeting that I called. I was the leader at the time, and I called it in a secure room in the Capitol. In that meeting were the two men that ran the defense appropriations, Stevens from Alaska and Inouye from Hawaii, both revered senators, well respected. They'd always, both of them, been good to me, a Democrat and a Republican. The Republican, he thought I was so good at my floor activities that I was one of 3 people he gave during his career a Hulk tie, he called it, you know, the Great Hulk. And so I had that tie. So he was a Republican, but he was good to me. Inouye was good to me for so many reasons. The reason I got my deal done, the now famous negotiated settlement on the very complicated water deal in northern Nevada, was because Inouye, he put that thing through the Indian Affairs Committee after it failed in Interior. And anyway, we got it done because of him. So I just had such admiration for those two men. So, and it was an easy meeting. Why? Because I said, gentlemen, I have been following for a number of years these unexplained aerial phenomenon. I don't know what they are, and I want to study it. And Stevens said, and that's why I said it was an easy meeting, he said, I've been waiting for decades for someone to ask me to do something about this. He said, I was a pilot during World War II. And on one occasion, I'll never forget, he said it was like yesterday. I was flying, and there was an object next to me. I could not get rid of that. I couldn't. I slowed up, it would be there. I speed up, it would be there. I would dive, it would be there. He said, I called, nothing on radar. He said, I am a very, very calm combat pilot, but he said, that disturbed me. I could never, ever figure that out. And he said, when I got back, like everybody else, I wasn't going to say anything. Something was wrong with me. And he said, so what do you need? And that was the beginning of how we got this program started.
How did it proceed from there? Securing the appropriation, all that stuff. How does it work?
It was done.
Boom.
When those two men wanted it, it was done. It was all over with.
Are you glad the story's out?
Yeah, I'm very glad. Because now we have scientific evidence, because of the studies that was done because of the actions of Inouye, Stevens, and Reid. We have now scientific study that has done something that needed to be done for a long, long time. We've documented all these observances. We have situations where we have, in northern part of America, we had missile bases that, how many were stationed there? I don't know how many was on it, but it's all in documents. But scores and scores of mostly men up there would come out and look up there, oh, I don't know what that is, and they wouldn't leave. The communications in the missile defense installation was shut down. Didn't happen once, more than once. We have things in ships at sea. These things in the water, what is that? They can't get rid of them? There's nothing on radar, because why? Because the whole communication system on the ship's dead. This is all documented now. And now we can have pilots and shipmasters who see these strange events, report it back to their superiors, because they're not crazy. It's been happening for a long time. So why shouldn't we study this? I was first became convinced that something should be done because I received a communication from a man who worked for one of the defense agencies, PhD in physics and math, a brilliant man. And he said, I know everything there is to know about rockets. But he said, I don't know what all these things are about. I don't know. He said, but I do know this. If China, Russia, Japan, other countries are doing this, and we're not, something's wrong. He said, because if the technology we have, the way these things are described and the way people see them, if this movement took place in anything we have now available to us, it would kill everybody. They couldn't withstand those G-forces. Something's sitting there and boom, down it goes. So as a result of that, this man and I developed a relationship. He had to hide it from his superiors because they're all afraid. Everybody was afraid. He took a chance with his job. I have good news now. He's been there long enough. He's retired, so they can't fire him. I feel very good that I had something to do. A man who has I don't have a degree in science. I was educated in Searchlight. My math skills aren't that great, but I've been fascinated my whole life with math and science. And I'm glad that someone with that background I have has had something to do with stimulating, I hope, for a long, long time to come, a new area of science that we should take a look at.
Did you get any indication from people like the man you're talking about or others in the intelligence community or defense that Russia and China are looking at this stuff, are studying it? Or do you know?
The answer is yes. We don't know, I don't know the depth, but of course, why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't we already have been involved in this? You don't have to be some kind of a science fiction screwball to think that there's nothing to this, or there's, this is, I'm just talking about basic science.
Yeah, this is not, as you have said to me, it's not a search for little green men. It's an investigation of how this technology works, because whoever gets that technology.
George, I just did a long interview, as I know you know, with the New York Times. And they ran a story. But before I did that interview, I sat down with that woman in my office. And I said, her name was Helene. I said, if you're here to find out where little men they found in New Mexico after World War II, where they're stored in some vault someplace, or you want to spend your time here talking about flying saucers that took people someplace else, I'm not into that. I don't know anything about that. All I do know is that I am interested in science. What is going on in our world? We're doing all kinds of space exploration. Couldn't we at least do some work from the perspective of the security and safety of our country to look at this stuff?
What I'd been told, well, maybe I ask you this, how was the selection process for BASS, the people who ended up with the program?
Well, it was done like we should do it. Even though this was a secure program, we wanted to make sure that people couldn't complain that it was some sweetheart deal. No, put out to bid, and the person that wanted to do the work and qualified under the terms of the stuff that Inouye and Stevens put together, they would get it, and that's how it came to be.
Bigelow.
Yeah, somebody here that is who is a man who is interested in science.
Well, as you know, he had expertise on this topic. He'd funded his own study for a long time.
Yeah, he funded his own studies for 25 years.
The suggestion is, well, this is just
But the problem with what Bob Bigelow did, it didn't have credibility because it was a private deal, and where would you disseminate that information? Here it is done under the auspices of the United States government. And it's now there for people to see. There are a few very select passive parts of it that are not everyone can look at, but 95% of everybody can look at it. And it's out there now. We never had a place that you had what we call a protocol where someone can look and say, how many sightings have we had in New Mexico? How many have we had in Utah? Or, you know, and they looked at what reports they'd gotten from other countries. Or some countries have done quite a bit of work on this publicly. Some small countries in South America, as an example.
How would you categorize what they learned? Because we've seen some stories that said Senator Reid killed the program because they didn't come up with any information that was useful.
Well, of course, Reid didn't kill the program. I wish it were still going. But there was change in House leadership, and for a lot of political reasons, it didn't go forward. But I would hope the organizations, there's one out there that I've read about. It was a nice article written in Nevada Press about a company that is formed by a group of scientists, not a group of scientists, a man who is interested in what can be done from a public relations standpoint as far as doing documentaries and things of that nature. In fact, he's a famous rock and roll singer, but he's rich and can help with this. And they're going to go public. I hope that they can do well and they can get involved in this also. What I hope is that this study is given credibility to this area of science, and so that the federal government now can go to the floor of which we couldn't do, could go to the floor of the United States Senate and recognize that we're not here talking about the never-ending subject of New Mexico and the crash that was down there 50, 60 years ago, that we no longer have to worry about aliens coming and taking people away. That's for somebody else to talk about. What we can talk about now is, should this scientific study continue that has already been started? A huge, volumes and volumes of stuff. We now have a basis for doing it.
And the ultimate aim is figure out, can we build this technology? Can we master it? Lift, velocity, things of that
And
sort.
George, if we can't build it, how are they doing this? How is this happening? You know, there are all kinds of theories. Maybe they're not real aircraft. Maybe it's some kind of a light phenomenon that somebody has learned to do this. You know, maybe somebody's doing that. I don't know.
Would you agree with the premise? I've seen a couple of these reports that really they didn't learn much, or do you think that they learned plenty?
George, I think these studies are so loaded with information. The reason I say that is that we learned a lot, but one thing we did learn is that over the decades, there have a lot of things happened that there's no explanation for. They are now put in categories. So you no longer have to go to some funny book to find out, what is this all about? Hey, listen, the federal government has prepared a report that actually documents this, time and place and who did it, the people involved. That's pretty good stuff. It's not speculation. Now, do we have the names of everybody? Of course not, but we know where occurrences have taken place, and we know that I don't know how many people have reported stuff like this, but it's not in the hundreds, it's in the upper thousands. It's lots and lots of people.
It's millions.
Yeah.
There's one quote in the New York Times story that refers to Mr. Bigelow and his organization, and it talks about exotic materials that they've acquired and are studying. But do you know about that? Do you know about the materials, or can you talk about it?
You know, I was writing a letter. I had gone to a wedding, and it was a Indian Pakistani wedding, and all these beautiful dresses and stuff. And I was going to use the word exotic, but I thought, I don't know what that word means for sure. I looked it up. No, didn't fit that. I was talking about those dresses were so exotic, didn't fit. So I don't know what exotic means in the context of this. But I don't know anything about exotic materials. I don't know. But you know, there's been a lot of talk about that, but I don't know anything about it other than having been talked about.
Luis Elizondo, the guy who was inside the Pentagon, has a
Yes.
close relationship with Secretary Mattis, resigned. He said, look, I feel that this is important to study, and it's not being given serious consideration after this program ended. And now he's with DeLong, and he's going to be studying it further. He had indicated to me when I met him that there has been an increased acceleration of these incidents, like the one that happened off the coast of San Diego.
Yeah, George, what has happened that I'm aware of is most everything we were aware of took place in the air. But now, as I mentioned previously to you, we now have occurrences that we have in the oceans, which people didn't know anything about, or they weren't accounted for. But now there are. There's, I mean, one of the prime places we've had reports are off the coast of San Diego. So that's done quite a bit, so for lack of a better description. So yes, and Elizondo is one of the people in the federal government that wasn't afraid to talk to his people about that. People in, here's what I've learned in government. Well-meaning people are afraid to take chances. If it hasn't been done before, we're not going to do it. That way is safe. And this is an area where it hasn't been done before, and we've got to do it.
Was there opposition to this research within the government, the intelligence community, for religious reasons? Did you ever hear that? Opposition that maybe this is something evil?
Yes. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people who didn't like it for a number of reasons, and religious, not affiliation, religious views of people didn't fit what they wanted to spend money on. And I repeat, people like the man that came to me, the PhD, he struggled to come forward with this. He was taking his job in his hands, and I'm glad he survived, because there were people there, the people that ran his agency, they knew what he had done, but they weren't going to give him a pat on the back at all. They were every step of the way. We would bring them in to talk, oh no, I'm not sure we know much about the program. You know, they were no help. They were afraid. They were afraid why? It hadn't been done before, we're not going to do it. If it hasn't been done before, we're not going to do it.
The implication that this is something Harry Reid did for a friend of his, Bob Bigelow. What do you say to those folks? I mean, here's my take on it. When you look at the amount of money, it was substantial in one sense, but in another sense, Bob Bigelow is a billionaire. You know?
Yeah, Bob Bigelow and I have political views that are not in sync. He and I have known each other for a long, long time. I knew him before he knew me. One of the first cases I had in law school was a case where his father was killed in a plane crash. It was a famous Nevada case called Gordon versus Leitenberger. Crashed at LA International Airport. He was 18 years old and his dad was killed in that crash. So I've known of him since he was 18 years old. We met later on, in both being young men trying to make our way here in Las Vegas. Bob Bigelow doesn't need me for anything. I appreciate Bigelow's interest in this area. His interest in this area, because I became interested because a friend of mine said, you know, this guy's doing some stuff. Why don't you go to one of his seminars, they're called, or meetings? And I went to one of those meetings, and it wasn't a bunch of kooks, it was a bunch of scientists. And I sat through that. I thought, boy, this is interesting. So Bob Bigelow and I are friends. He's helped me on occasion for projects I had. But I mean, he didn't need me for anything. If anybody knew Bob Bigelow, he would laugh if he said, Harry Reid did this to ingratiate himself with you. He would laugh.
Yeah, it's more like he did a favor by housing this, finding a place for this study, and that it's not a
Well,
boondoggle that
we-
made him a bunch of money.
Well, you have to talk to others about
Yeah.
how he was given the award, but it was put out for the public. But I'm sure one reason it helped is he gave the best cost because he was willing to build the infrastructure. He did everything on his own because he liked the subject.
Have you had any calls from colleagues who are still in Congress who said, hey, we'd
bet-
like to know more about this?
You bet I have. I've got a call with a very prominent member of the United States Senate Friday. He called and he said, I've been interested in this all my whole life, and I want you to talk to him. He said, I'll talk to him. I've gotten calls, yes, from a number of colleagues. I've got calls from people in the business community. I have people who know me personally, aren't afraid to call me. I had a call last night from somebody I have the deepest respect for, I'm so surprised that you're interested in this. But he wanted to know. So it's a subject out there that people shouldn't be afraid of. That's my point. George, the way I looked at this when I went ahead with this, I had to run for election, but I didn't care, because I didn't care if somebody came after me on this issue, because I felt that I was right. I didn't care how they judged me on this. It wasn't as if I was in my waning days of after I'd injured myself, no longer be in the Senate. No, I did this a long time ago. I got started on this.
Is this an appropriate topic for a congressional hearing of some sort? Would that be useful?
Yeah, yes, George. Now it's out. Why shouldn't they do this? You take one airplane. You could want the cost of one military aircraft. Pick the cheapest one they have. Cheapest one. Give that money to this research. It's more important than that one airplane. We have enough bombs and bullets to take care of us for a long time. But we don't have enough scientific information to help my children, my grandchildren understand the future.
If the Russians were to get this technology and figure out how it works and build it before we got there, there could be serious ramifications.
If I were betting someone's ahead of us, I wouldn't bet it was the Russians. I'd bet it's Chinese.
Anything else? You guys think of anything? Anything else you want to say on it, Senator?
No.
I can't remember if I asked this on camera before, but the people inside that program, they were afraid that the story would get out. That's why they wanted to go away, right?
Yes, and one thing we didn't mention, the people that worked on this program for the 5 years that it was in existence were scientists. They weren't a bunch of people who had read comic books. They were people who were scientists. This program, the work that we put together, I say we, I didn't have much to do with it, but I helped make sure something was put together, was scientists put it together.
Okay. Do I call it a special access program, or you tried to get it a special access program?
Yeah, we couldn't get that.
Okay. So it is sort of hard to find, but it's not classified.
No,
Or is it?
most of it isn't. No, most of it isn't.
Would you expect the reports to be made public in some way then?
Let them flow. I don't care.
I think
No
of
one
the
should.
Sensitivities is they interviewed a lot of witnesses who gave them sensitive
oh,
information. You have
yes,
to take that
yes,
stuff out.
yes.
So, yeah.
They take their names out, not what they said.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Great.
All right.
I really appreciate it.
My
Keep
pleasure,
me in
George.
mind.
We'll talk some more.